The world of art is a vast and beautiful one, filled with colours and textures that can move you to tears or inspire you to create. But sometimes the simplest of tools can produce the most profound works of art, and that's what we're going to explore in this video. Artistic composition is the arrangement of visual elements in a way that is pleasing to the eye, and when it comes to black and white, the possibilities really are endless. A successful wildlife drawing not only captures the beauty of the animal, but can also tell a story and convey a sense of character and personality. To convey this, it's important to have a clear focal point. This can be a specific area of the drawing, or a particular element that stands out from the rest. There are a number of different rules that can be applied when planning a picture. Rule of thirds, leading lines, negative space, balance, golden ratio, focal point, symmetry, asymmetry, movement, contrast. If you're feeling confused, it's not surprising. What we need to do is to simplify everything and deal with the main ones, starting with the rule of thirds. This is a basic principle of composition that involves dividing the paper into a grid of 9 equal parts, with 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines intersecting at 4 points. The rule suggests placing important elements along these lines or their intersections. The theory is that this will create a more balanced and interesting composition, but should this rule be strictly adhered to? This picture was created using this method, with the eye being the key feature, and as you can see, when the grid is overlaid, it intersects with this. Now, this is the original composition that I made without using a grid, with the subject being offset more to the left. At first glance, there appears to be only a relatively minor difference between them, but take a look at both pictures together. The upper image appears to be more majestic and has a real presence about it, whereas the lower one seems more focused, as if watching something that is out of frame. It is surprising that with a relatively minor difference between the two, that we interpret them quite differently. But this is why composition is such an important part of any picture. So what do you think? Why not let me know in the comments which of the two images you prefer? The next rule to look at is the use of leading lines. The rule refers to using lines in the image to draw the viewer's eye to the main subject or focal point. These lines can be straight, curved or diagonal, and can be found in various elements of the image. Now, these can be incorporated into a composition, or they can just naturally occur. In this image, the weight that is created is used to draw the viewer's attention up towards the polar bear. The next thing that we're going to look at is the use of negative space. This involves using a relatively featureless or blank area of the picture to create interest or speculation. And if used correctly, this can be incredibly effective. In this picture, negative space is used to make the viewer imagine a point of focus for the animal that is outside of the visible image. The subtle grey background also helps to give the picture that cold, wintry atmosphere. This is also another way of being able to add interest into a composition. With this image, negative space is used to give a sense of movement. The application of dust enhances this further and makes the scene more dramatic. So let's just play around with this a little bit. This time I put the negative space at the top of the image, but in this instance, because the subject is moving, it just looks strange. Let's now put the negative space so as it looks like the subject is moving into it, and that works much better. So is the composition finished, or can something extra be added to it? By adding the mother's foot disappearing out of frame, this helps to add purpose, as the baby is clearly running to keep up with her. Now, this is quite a quirky composition, but I do feel that it just works so well. Another consideration is the use of strong contrast. This is particularly important when working in black and white, and can be used to create both high-key and low-key images. High-key images will generally feature a very white, blown-out background, making the subject stand out. The opposite is low-key, utilising very dark or black backgrounds and featuring a subject with deep shadows and dramatic contrast between light and dark areas of the image. Again, these are also some of the many things that you have to take into consideration when working on a composition. Balance is another thing that can also be incorporated into a picture. A balanced composition is one where the visual weight of the elements is evenly distributed across the artwork. In turn, symmetry is created within the composition. This can also be a great way to show interaction between animals as well as their environment. For example, this can be used to show a playful nature or a final farewell. So that's some examples of symmetrical images, but what about asymmetrical? Well, this is open to a little bit of artistic license, as the weight of the elements within the image are not evenly distributed. This can also incorporate foreground as well as background elements. In this example, the Grevy zebra foal is the main focal point of the picture, whereas the mother is a much more background element, and as such is done in a much softer tone so as not to draw as much attention. This can also help to create separation between two individuals. We now get to what is probably the most complicated and controversial of all of these rules, and that's the golden ratio. Now, this is more of a mathematical approach, and maths is not really my strong point, so please bear with me on this one. This ratio does appear in nature a lot, and because of this we're subconsciously very used to seeing it. But how can we use this when composing a picture? Well, one way is to use this ratio of 1.618 to construct a grid. The golden ratio is what's known as an irrational number, which means that every digit after the decimal point goes on forever, does not repeat, and cannot be written as a simple fraction. To create a grid, take the overall width and multiply it by 1.618. Divide by 2.618, and this gives the measurement for the longest length. This can then be mirrored for the other side and then repeated for the height. This is also known as a phi grid. Again, by using the grid, the placement of key elements should be visually pleasing and balanced. But bear in mind, this is not always necessarily the case. The next of these is the golden rectangle. To make this, first start with a square, multiply the length of one of its sides by 1.618, the golden ratio, and add this to one end. And that gives you a golden rectangle. But you don't have to stop there. You can continue to add rectangles again and again. And if you then draw a curve through all of these, you will have a golden spiral. This can be used to lead a viewer's gaze through a picture to the main focal point. Now, these spirals do occur in nature, but they are not always exact, and are generally more of an example of what is called a logarithmic spiral. If you want to see a more in-depth explanation about this ratio, then I put a link in the description below to a video that I found useful when researching this one. So let's try to create a basic composition using the golden spiral. I've chosen this image of a tiger to use as an example, and when the template is overlaid and the image cropped, we have a very simple portrait. Again, this is open to a little bit of interpretation. This is just one composition, but there are many other ways that this could be used to create different versions. From landscape to more contemporary. So is this the be-all and end-all when it comes to composition? Well, no. In truth, none of these should even be considered as rules. They are purely a guide to help you create a picture. In fact, if you were to give the same reference to 10 artists, they will all compose the picture differently. Before taking pencil to paper, I find it's a good idea to plan any picture thoroughly, from subject matter to the overall size of the piece. I've got a picture that I want to do sometime in the future, so let's have a look at that as an example. The first thing that I can see looking at this is that it wants to be a large picture. This will give the piece a presence, as well as maximising the level of detail. I also feel this will work best as a high key image. So with that decided, the next thing to do is to have a closer look. The cub on the left is a really nice pose. I just need to add the part of the tail that's missing. The obvious problem is that the mother's sticking her tongue out at us. Now, this is a relatively simple fix, but I'll probably replace it with this picture as I think it's a nicer pose. So now for the cub on the right. and I actually like the fact that she's looking in the opposite direction. But if I do change my mind, I have got some alternatives. This picture is a long way off, so I have got plenty of time before I decide on the final composition. Thank you to everybody who requested this video. It certainly has been interesting to make, and I did have to do a fair amount of research. So if you have found this video interesting, please remember to like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.